advisor.
Any psychotic ex-boyfriends I should be aware of?
Oh, you have no idea. We're tonight's entertainment.
I've seen now what I have to become to stop men like him.
I promise you, the dawn is coming. Come on. I'm gonna give it to him. No!
You'll see. I'll show you.
The Dark Knight, 2008, a complete analysis, analyses and explanations. Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight stands as one of the most influential films of the 21st century, a cinematic landmark that fundamentally altered the perception of what a superhero film could achieve. Released on July 18, 2008, it transcended its genre to become a cultural phenomenon, a critical masterpiece, and a box office juggernaut that grossed over $1 billion worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing film of 2008 and the first superhero film to reach that milestone. Produced on a budget of $185 million, the film's commercial success was matched by its artistic ambition, earning $533 million domestically and $470 million internationally. As the second installment in Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, it sits between Batman Begins, 2005, and The Dark Knight Rises, 2012. With Nolan directing from a screenplay co-written with his brother Jonathan, based on a story by Nolan and David S. Goyer. What makes The Dark Knight remarkable is its lasting impact. It became the first comic book film to win major industry awards, earning Heath Ledger a posthumous Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor alongside an Oscar for Best Sound Editing. In 2020, the United States Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry, officially recognizing its profound cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. These analyses and explanations begin with a narrative breakdown. The film opens with a brilliantly executed bank heist that introduces the Joker through a cascade of betrayals, as masked criminals systematically eliminate each other until only the mastermind remains. This sequence immediately establishes his modus operandi: chaos, manipulation, and the exploitation of human greed, as he escapes with the mob's money. The central conflict emerges from an unlikely alliance between Batman, Police Lieutenant Jim Gordon, and the newly elected District Attorney Harvey Dent, who join forces to dismantle Gotham City's organized crime syndicates. Dent, dubbed the White Knight of Gotham, represents the legitimate, institutional hope that Batman, as an outlaw vigilante, can never embody, with Bruce Wayne seeing in him a lawful successor. This alliance faces its first test when the mob's accountant, Lau, flees to Hong Kong with their fortune, leading to Batman's spectacular extradition of Lau, a sequence showcasing Nolan's commitment to practical filmmaking. Cornered, the mob bosses turn to the Joker, who offers to kill Batman for half their money, setting the stage for a systematic assault on Gotham's institutions. The Joker kills Judge Cirillo and Police Commissioner Loeb, then threatens to continue his murders unless Batman reveals his identity. When Dent falsely claims to be Batman, the Joker attacks the police convoy, leading to a spectacular chase sequence that ends with his capture, though this is revealed to be part of his design. During the interrogation, the Joker reveals that Dent and Rachel Dawes are imprisoned in locations rigged to explode, but he has deliberately swapped the addresses. Rachel dies, and Dent survives with his left side horribly burned, losing his sanity along with his fiancée in the film's emotional and moral pivot point. The final act traces two parallel developments. The Joker orchestrates the destruction of the mob's remaining wealth and stages a terrifying social experiment with two fairies, while the transformed Harvey Dent, now calling himself Two-Face, pursues vengeance using his scarred coin. Batman stops the Joker, but arrives too late to prevent Dent's corruption, ultimately killing him to save Gordon's family and taking the blame for Dent's crimes to preserve Gotham's hope. Moving into character analysis, Christian Bale's portrayal of Bruce Wayne in Batman represents a character caught in an impossible contradiction. A billionaire playboy who desperately wants to retire, yet a vigilante who recognizes his own obsolescence. His defining characteristic is his ethical boundary. He refuses to kill, understanding that crossing this line would make him indistinguishable from the criminals he fights. Heath Ledger's Joker is widely regarded as one of cinema's greatest villainous performances, earning a posthumous Academy Award through legendary preparation that included 6 weeks secluded in a motel room developing the character's voice, laugh, and psychological tics. Drawing inspiration from punk rocker Sid Vicious and Malcolm McDowell in A Clockwork Orange, this Joker differs fundamentally from previous interpretations. He is not motivated by money or revenge, but by a philosophical mission to prove that order is a fragile illusion. The Joker's relationship with Batman forms the film's philosophical core, with his observation that "you complete me," recognizing their symbiosis as both freaks operating outside society's norms. His goal is not to kill Batman but to break him, to prove that everyone, even the White Knight Harvey Dent, can be corrupted. Aaron Eckhart's Harvey Dent represents the film's most tragic arc, introduced as Gotham's charismatic White Knight, who fights crime within the law, using his coin to represent commitment to probability and fairness. Rachel's death and his own disfigurement transform him into Two-Face, with his scarred coin reflecting his damaged psyche, and his fall represents the Joker's ultimate philosophical victory. The supporting cast provides essential grounding. Gary Oldman's Jim Gordon is the honest cop caught between institutional corruption and vigilante justice. Maggie Gyllenhaal's Rachel Dawes serves as the emotional center whose death catalyzes the film's tragedy. Michael Caine's Alfred provides the moral compass with his story about a bandit who just wanted to watch the world burn. And Morgan Freeman's Lucius Fox represents ethical conscience through his threat to resign over the mass surveillance system. Thematically, the central conflict is between order and chaos, with the Joker functioning as a philosophical anarchist who seeks to demonstrate that all order is a fragile construct that collapses under pressure. His experiments, the bank robbery, the ferry scenario, and Dent's corruption, are designed to prove this, while Batman represents the attempt to impose order through discipline and sacrifice. The film distinguishes between two types of heroism: Dent's White Knight as a public, legitimate hero, and Batman's Dark Knight as a hidden, morally ambiguous figure willing to become the villain to preserve Dent's legacy. This raises profound questions about the costs of heroism, as Batman sacrifices his reputation, his relationship, and his identity for a city that must believe him to be a criminal. The Dark Knight has been extensively analyzed as a response to the September 11th attacks and the subsequent War on Terror, with the Joker functioning as a terrorist who uses bombings and psychological warfare to destabilize society. The film's engagement with controversial counterterrorism tactics, particularly Batman's use of mass surveillance mirroring warrantless wiretapping programs, represents an implicit critique, with Lucius Fox's insistence on destroying the system after use underscoring the ethical boundaries being tested. The motif of duality permeates the film, from Batman and Bruce Wayne as two identities of the same person to Harvey Dent's literal physical manifestation as Two-Face. The Joker's origin stories are deliberately inconsistent, suggesting his identity is itself a performance, while even the title, The Dark Knight, positions Batman as the dark counterpart to Dent's White Knight. Examining production aspects, Christopher Nolan's direction represents a deliberate departure from traditional superhero filmmaking, drawing inspiration from Michael Mann's crime drama Heat, 1995, to structure the film as a crime film that happens to feature comic book characters. The screenplay by the Nolan brothers is notable for its density and complexity, interweaving multiple plot threads in ways that demand active engagement from viewers. Nolan's commitment to practical effects distinguishes the film from contemporary blockbusters, with the flipping 18-wheel truck, the hospital explosion, and the Hong Kong building penetration accomplished with minimal computer-generated imagery. The film was also the first major motion picture to use high-resolution IMAX cameras, with 6 major action sequences shot in the format. Wally Pfister's cinematography transforms Chicago into a foreboding, gothic Gotham City, while Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard's score employs contrasting musical languages. The Joker's theme using a single, sustained electronic note building unbearable tension against Batman's theme building rhythmic momentum, suggesting disciplined forward movement. The film's marketing campaign was itself innovative, launching an interactive viral campaign following criticism of Ledger's casting that gradually revealed the character's design and philosophy. Ledger's death in January 2008, 6 months before the film's release, intensified public interest and transformed his performance into a posthumous cultural event. Upon release, The Dark Knight received widespread critical acclaim, with Roger Ebert praising it as a haunted movie that leaps beyond its origins and becomes an engrossing tragedy. Reviewers highlighted the film's gripping character study, approach, and its transformation of the superhero genre into something more mature, with Ledger's performance nearly universally praised for its slow cadence of speech and languid movement. A critical minority argued the film was overrated, with some criticizing Christian Bale's dull Batman and gargled battery acid voice, while others accused fans of sympathy vote inflation due to Ledger's death. Several reviews dismissed the film's philosophical pretensions as exceeding its substance, finding it tedious and overcomplex despite its ambitions. Despite dissenting voices, the film achieved unprecedented success, becoming the first superhero film to gross $1 billion worldwide. Its failure to receive a Best Picture nomination at the 81st Academy Awards sparked such controversy that the Academy expanded the category from 5 to up to 10 nominees in subsequent years. In the years since its release, The Dark Knight has been assessed as one of the greatest superhero films ever made and among the greatest films in cinema history, with its influence on the genre considered incalculable. The Library of Congress's 2020 selection for the National Film Registry confirmed its status as a film of enduring cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. These analyses and explanations conclude by recognizing that the film's enduring power lies in its refusal to offer easy answers, with Batman's solution to take the blame for Dent's crimes remaining morally ambiguous. The Joker's challenge, that everyone is one bad day from corruption, is never fully refuted, only contained, while the central question of whether fighting chaos requires compromising civilization's values remains unresolved. The Dark Knight ultimately offers not answers but a mirror, presenting a vision of a city under siege, asking uncomfortable questions about security and freedom, and recognizing that heroism often requires sacrifice. It is, as Roger Ebert recognized, a haunted film. And like all great haunted films, it lingers in the mind long after the credits roll. Christopher Nolan's direction deliberately inverts the traditional superhero narrative by placing his protagonist in a position of perpetual reaction rather than proactive heroism, forcing Batman to respond to the Joker's escalating provocations rather than pursuing his own agenda. This structural choice transforms the film from a conventional action narrative into a tension-filled thriller where the antagonist consistently dictates the terms of engagement, demonstrating Nolan's commitment to subverting genre expectations. The director's background in independent cinema with films like Memento and Insomnia informed his methodical, psychologically focused approach to blockbuster filmmaking, ensuring that spectacle always served character development rather than the reverse. Nolan's insistence on shooting on location in Chicago rather than on studio lots gave Gotham City a tangible, lived-in quality that distinguished it from the stylized, often artificial depictions of the city in previous Batman films. The director's collaboration with his brother Jonathan, who had written the short story that inspired Memento, created a writing partnership uniquely suited to crafting narratives centered on moral ambiguity, psychological fragmentation, and unreliable perceptions of truth. Their screenplay deliberately withholds easy catharsis, denying audiences the satisfaction of a clean victory and instead offering a morally compromised resolution that challenges the very foundations of heroic storytelling. This commitment to complexity extended to the film's editing, with Lee Smith's masterful pacing creating sequences of almost unbearable tension while allowing crucial character moments the space necessary for emotional resonance. The decision to structure the film around three central figures, Batman, the Joker, and Harvey Dent, rather than a traditional protagonist-antagonist binary, allowed Nolan to explore a triangular dynamic where allegiances shift and moral positions become increasingly unstable. Each character serves as a philosophical foil to the others, with Batman's rigid discipline contrasted against the Joker's absolute chaos, while Dent's institutional idealism occupies the unstable middle ground that ultimately collapses. This tripartite structure gives the film its tragic shape, as the audience witnesses the systematic destruction of the most hopeful figure among the three, suggesting that in Nolan's vision of Gotham, idealism without the willingness to compromise is inherently vulnerable to corruption. The director's background in architecture and spatial relationships informs the film's visual language, with characters consistently framed against the city's imposing structures to emphasize their smallness against the systems they seek to change or destroy. Heath Ledger's approach to embodying the Joker represented a radical departure from method acting conventions, as he developed not merely a performance, but an entire philosophical system that the character would inhabit, approaching the role with an intellectual rigor that matched his physical transformation. The actor's famous 6-week isolation in a London motel room was not merely about developing vocal patterns and physical tics, but about constructing a coherent worldview for a character defined by the absence of coherent identity. Ledger's Joker speaks in constantly shifting origin stories. First an abusive father, then a wife who disfigured him, then a series of contradictory accounts, because the actor understood that the character's power derives precisely from his refusal to be pinned down to a single narrative. The physicality Ledger developed, described by cinematographer Wally Pfister as a snake-like quality, combined with the character's distinctive vocal cadence to create an on-screen presence that felt genuinely unpredictable and genuinely threatening. Ledger's preparation included extensive study of Alex DeLarge from A Clockwork Orange, recognizing that Malcolm McDowell's performance achieved its unsettling effect through a combination of childlike playfulness and utterly amoral violence. The actor also drew from the stage presence of punk musicians like Sid Vicious, understanding that the Joker's appearance was not merely aesthetic but performative, a costume designed to provoke visceral reactions from those who witnessed it. Ledger's decision to lick his lips constantly throughout the film originated from his understanding that the character's facial scars would create a perpetual sensation of moisture requiring attention, demonstrating the depth of physical specificity he brought to the role. The actor's death in January 2008, 6 months before the film's release, transformed public perception of his performance. But those who worked with him consistently emphasized that the quality of his work was evident long before tragedy conferred additional significance upon it. Christopher Nolan has stated that Ledger's Joker was created entirely by the actor himself, with minimal directorial intervention, as Nolan recognized that attempting to guide such a singular creative vision would only diminish its power. The performance's lasting impact is evidenced by its continued presence in critical discussions of cinema's greatest villains, standing alongside Anthony Hopkins's Hannibal Lecter and Javier Bardem's Anton Chigurh as a benchmark against which subsequent antagonists are measured. Ledger's achievement was all the more remarkable given the intense skepticism that greeted his casting, with fans and critics alike doubting that the romantic lead of Brokeback Mountain could embody one of popular culture's most iconic villains. Christian Bale's portrayal of Bruce Wayne required navigating the character's multiple identities with a precision that balanced the public playboy persona, the private grieving son, and the mythic vigilante into a single coherent psychological portrait. Bale's physical transformation between the film's quieter moments and its action sequences demonstrated his commitment to the role, Maintaining the muscular physique developed for Batman begins while adding layers of exhaustion that reflected the character's 3 years of fighting Gotham's criminal element. The actor's controversial Batman voice, frequently criticized as gravelly or unintelligible, was a deliberate choice rooted in practical considerations, as Bale understood that a recognizable voice would compromise the character's carefully protected secret identity. Bale's performance captures the fundamental tragedy of Bruce Wayne's existence. That the peace he desperately seeks is precisely what his mission makes impossible, creating a character trapped in perpetual self-sacrifice with no end point in sight. The actor's chemistry with Michael Caine's Alfred grounds the film's emotional stakes, as their scenes together reveal the paternal relationship that has sustained Bruce through years of isolation and grief. Bale's Bruce Wayne must constantly perform versions of himself: the frivolous billionaire for public consumption, the grieving son in the mansion's private spaces, the focused vigilante in the batsuit, creating a character whose authentic self becomes increasingly difficult to locate. The film's narrative arc forces Bruce to confront the possibility of his own obsolescence, with Harvey Dent representing everything Batman cannot be: a legitimate hero who can operate in daylight with public support and institutional authority. Bale's performance registers the subtle shifts in Bruce's psychology, as this possibility first offers hope for his retirement, then becomes another burden when Dent's corruption forces Batman to assume responsibility for crimes he did not commit. The physical demands of the role required Bale to perform many of his own stunts, including the film's complex chase sequences, contributing to the visceral authenticity that distinguishes Nolan's approach from CGI-dependent contemporaries. Bale's interpretation emphasizes Bruce Wayne's fundamental loneliness, a man surrounded by allies and resources who nonetheless must bear the ultimate burden of his choices alone. The actor's preparation included extensive martial arts training that incorporated Krav Maga, Kali, and other combat disciplines into a distinctive fighting style that prioritized efficiency over theatricality, reflecting Batman's practical approach to violence as a tool rather than an expression of ego. Aaron Eckhart's Harvey Dent carries the film's emotional and thematic weight, serving as the character whose arc transforms The Dark Knight from a crime thriller into a genuine tragedy. Eckhart's performance carefully calibrates Dent's idealism so that it never becomes naive or foolish, presenting a district attorney whose commitment to justice is informed by genuine courage rather than blind optimism. The character's famous coin is introduced not as a symbol of madness, but as a tool Dent uses to maintain perspective, trusting probability to guide him when human judgment might be compromised by emotion or bias. Eckhart's Dent possesses a magnetic quality that makes Bruce Wayne's desire to pass the torch to him entirely believable, with the character's public charisma balanced against private moments of genuine vulnerability and doubt. The film's pivotal scene, Dent's interrogation of a Joker henchman, demonstrates the darkness that always existed within the character, as his aggressive methods and willingness to endanger a suspect reveal a capacity for violence that the Joker will later exploit. Eckhart's physical transformation after Dent's disfigurement required extensive prosthetic makeup that the actor wore for hours each day, contributing to the character's visible fragmentation through performance that emphasized his physical pain and psychological unraveling. Two-Face coin becomes scarred on one side, reflecting Dent's own damaged psyche and transforming what was once a tool for objective decision-making into a mechanism for abdicating moral responsibility. Eckhart's performance in the film's final act depicts a man who has abandoned hope entirely, operating with the cold logic of vengeance that stands as the darkest possible version of the idealism he once embodied. The character's murders, each determined by the coin's flip, are presented with clinical detachment, emphasizing that Dent has become the very thing he once fought against: a criminal who imposes his will through violence and terror. Eckhart brings pathos to even Two-Face's most monstrous actions, ensuring that audiences never forget the tragedy of what Dent has become rather than simply condemning what he does. The character's final scene, holding Gordon's family hostage, represents the complete inversion of everything Dent once stood for, transforming the protector of Gotham's families into a direct threat to domestic safety. Eckhart's performance throughout the film's moral descent serves as the evidence for the Joker's philosophical claims, demonstrating that the distance between idealism and corruption is far shorter than anyone wishes to believe. Gary Oldman's portrayal of Jim Gordon provides the film's moral anchor, representing institutional integrity without naivety and pragmatism without corruption. Oldman's Gordon is a character perpetually caught between competing demands: Loyalty to a system that has failed versus loyalty to a vigilante whose methods he cannot officially endorse. The actor brings a world-weary authenticity to the role, suggesting a man who has seen too much to maintain easy certainties, but who nonetheless continues to believe in the possibility of justice. Gordon's partnership with Batman operates through careful indirection, with the lieutenant never explicitly endorsing vigilantism, while consistently acting to support the masked figure's efforts to protect Gotham. Oldman's performance emphasizes Gordon's fundamental decency without sentimentalizing it, creating a character whose moral choices carry weight precisely because they are made with full awareness of their complexity. The character's relationship with Harvey Dent represents Gordon's hope that the system might be reformed from within, making Dent's eventual corruption not merely a plot development, but a profound personal betrayal. Oldman's restrained performance in the film's emotional climax, the murder of his wife in Dent's final confrontation, avoids histrionics in favor of a stunned devastation that registers more powerfully than any display of theatrical grief could achieve. Gordon's decision to accept Batman's proposal to take the blame for Dent's crimes represents the film's final moral compromise, with Oldman's performance conveying the weight of a choice that will haunt his character indefinitely. The actor's consistent presence across the trilogy provided essential continuity, with Gordon serving as the human-scale counterpart to Batman's mythic dimensions. Michael Caine's Alfred Pennyworth functions as both the emotional heart of the film and its most penetrating philosophical commentator, offering perspectives that the younger characters lack the experience to formulate. Caine's portrayal emphasizes Alfred's role as surrogate father, but one whose service to the Wayne family has required him to develop a practical wisdom that balances love with unsentimental assessment of reality. The character's famous Bandit in Burma monologue provides the film's thematic key, articulating the concept of a force motivated purely by destruction without any comprehensible agenda, the Joker's philosophical essence. Caine delivers this speech with the weight of lived experience, suggesting that Alfred has spent decades observing the worst of human nature and has developed a vocabulary for understanding it that Bruce Wayne, for all his intellect, has not yet acquired. The character's decision to burn Rachel's letter, which would have revealed her choice of Dent over Bruce, represents a profound ethical compromise, but Caine's performance frames it as an act of mercy rather than manipulation, protecting Bruce from pain that would serve no purpose. Alfred's relationship with Bruce is defined by a love that sometimes requires deception, with Caine conveying the deep pain of a man who must occasionally hurt his charge to protect him. The character's presence throughout the trilogy provides continuity not merely narrative but emotional, representing the domestic sphere that Bruce has sacrificed for his mission. Caine's background in classical British acting gave Alfred a dignity that elevated the role beyond mere servitude, presenting him as a man whose choice to serve is itself a form of nobility. The actor's chemistry with Christian Bale across all three films created one of cinema's most compelling surrogate father-son relationships, grounding the trilogy's escalating stakes in recognizable human emotion. Alfred's final conversation with Bruce, as they watch the funeral that will brand Batman a criminal, captures the tragic cost of the choices made throughout the film, with Caine's restrained performance conveying grief, pride, and resignation simultaneously. Morgan Freeman's Lucius Fox represents the ethical conscience of Wayne Enterprises and, by extension, the film's critique of unchecked technological power deployed without accountability. Freeman's portrayal emphasizes Lucius's fundamental decency without making him naive, presenting a man who understands the necessity of some compromise but has drawn clear lines he refuses to cross. The character's supervision of the mass surveillance system, the sonar network that transforms every cell phone in Gotham into a listening device, creates the film's most direct engagement with post-9/11 security debates. Freeman's performance during the scene where Batman reveals the system captures the moral gravity of the moment, with Lucius's quiet, "I didn't sign up for this," serving as the film's most explicit condemnation of surveillance overreach. The character's insistence on destroying the system after its use, and Batman's agreement, suggests a limitation to utilitarian ethics that distinguishes Nolan's vision from more cynical approaches to security. Freeman brings to Lucius a combination of intellectual authority and moral clarity that makes his judgments carry weight, ensuring that audiences understand the gravity of the ethical lines being crossed. The character's role as Batman's technology provider also serves a practical function within the film's world-building, explaining how a single individual could acquire the resources necessary to conduct his war on crime. The film's visual aesthetic, crafted by cinematographer Wally Pfister, transformed Chicago into a Gotham City that felt simultaneously contemporary and timeless, grounding the film's fantastical elements in recognizable reality. Pfister's use of IMAX cameras for major action sequences represented a technical innovation that gave the film a scale and immersive quality previously impossible in narrative filmmaking. The cinematographer's approach emphasized practical locations and natural light whenever possible, creating a visual language that distinguished Nolan's trilogy from the heavily stylized aesthetic of previous Batman films. Pfister's collaboration with Nolan dated back to Memento, and their shared visual vocabulary allowed the cinematographer to understand exactly how to translate the director's complex narrative structures into compelling imagery. The film's color palette shifted dramatically depending on which characters dominated the scene, with the Joker's presence introducing discordant purples and greens against Batman's disciplined blacks and the institutional grays of Gotham's civic spaces. Pfister's lighting of Heath Ledger's Joker deliberately emphasized the character's disheveled appearance, using harsh, unflattering angles that made the character appear genuinely unsettling rather than aesthetically composed. The cinematographer's work on the film's chase sequences required mounting IMAX cameras on vehicles in ways that had never been attempted, creating a visceral sense of speed and danger that CGI-enhanced sequences rarely achieve. Pfister's Academy Award for Inception would later recognize his broader contributions to Nolan's visual style, but The Dark Knight remains his most influential collaboration with the director. Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard's musical score for The Dark Knight departed from traditional superhero scoring by emphasizing texture and atmosphere over melodic themes, creating a soundscape that reflected the film's commitment to psychological realism. The Joker's theme, a single, sustained electronic note that builds to unbearable tension through layered harmonics, represented a radical approach to villain scoring, rejecting conventional melody entirely in favor of representing the character's singular focus on chaos. Zimmer's decision to write the Joker's music as a sound design element rather than a traditional score came from his understanding that the character operates outside any recognizable musical framework, requiring an approach that was equally disruptive. The composer's collaboration with Nolan allowed for an unprecedented integration of score and sound design, with musical elements bleeding into the film's ambient soundscape in ways that made the boundaries between music and noise deliberately ambiguous. Zimmer's work on Batman's theme built on the rhythmic momentum established in Batman Begins, adding layers of orchestral complexity that reflected the character's deepening emotional journey. The composer's use of cellos and electric guitars created a distinctive sonic palette that balanced classical tradition with contemporary aggression, reflecting the film's own balancing of comic book origins with modern crime drama aesthetics. James Newton Howard's contributions focused more heavily on the film's emotional moments, providing melodic warmth that balanced Zimmer's more abrasive textures. The score's influence on subsequent superhero films was immediate and lasting, establishing a template for psychologically complex scoring that moved beyond the bombastic, theme-heavy approach of earlier blockbusters. The film's editing, supervised by Lee Smith, created a rhythmic structure that sustained tension across a runtime of 152 minutes without ever feeling excessive or self-indulgent. Smith's approach to the film's multiple intersecting narratives required carefully calibrated pacing, allowing each plot thread sufficient development while maintaining forward momentum across the film's complex structure. The editor's work on the film's interrogation scene demonstrated his understanding of when to slow the rhythm, allowing the psychological tension between Batman and the Joker to develop without distraction. Smith's collaboration with Nolan extended through multiple films, developing a shorthand that allowed the editor to understand precisely how the director's complex narrative structures needed to be assembled. The film's chase sequence required Smith to cut together footage from multiple IMAX cameras, vehicle-mounted rigs, and traditional camera setups into a coherent sequence that maintained spatial clarity despite its breakneck pace. Smith's editorial choices during the film's final act, intercutting between the ferry passenger's moral crisis and Batman's pursuit of the Joker, created parallel tension that resolved in the film's most hopeful moment, the passenger's refusal to kill. The editor's restraint during the film's most emotionally charged moments, particularly Rachel's death and Dent's final confrontation, allowed the performances to register without editorial interference. Smith's work earned multiple award nominations and contributed significantly to the film's reputation for technical excellence. The film's production design, supervised by Nathan Crowley, created a Gotham City that expanded on the aesthetic established in Batman Begins while introducing new visual elements that reflected the escalating conflict. Crowley's work on the film's practical sets, including the reconstructed Batcave and the various locations across Chicago, gave the film a tactile authenticity that distinguished it from the green-screen-heavy productions that dominated the genre. The production designer's collaboration with Nolan on the film's IMAX sequences required constructing sets that could accommodate the camera's size and weight, influencing everything from the Batpod's design to the hospital room, where Dent Awakens transformed. Crowley's work on the film's practical effects included the construction of the 18-wheel truck that flips during the chase sequence, a moment achieved through physical engineering rather than digital effects. The production design emphasized the film's central themes through visual contrast, with the Joker's chaotic, improvised spaces set against Batman's disciplined, technologically advanced environments. Crowley's recreation of Chicago as Gotham involved transforming recognizable locations through lighting, signage, and practical set dressing that suggested a city simultaneously familiar and alien. The film's costume design, led by Lindy Hemming, created iconic looks for each major character that served narrative and thematic purposes beyond mere aesthetics. Hemming's work on the Joker's costume emphasized the character's improvised, unsettling quality. The too-short vest, the mismatched patterns, the cheap purple coat that suggested a clown who had assembled his identity from whatever materials were available. The designer's approach to Batman's suit refined the costume from Batman Begins, allowing greater mobility while maintaining the protective, armored quality that distinguished Nolan's realistic approach. Two-Face's costume after Dent's transformation deliberately emphasized the character's fragmentation, with half the suit burned and the other half maintained, visually representing his psychological division. Hemming's work on Harvey Dent's pre-transformation appearance used color and cut to suggest a politician of genuine substance rather than mere style, with suits that conveyed authority without ostentation. The designer's collaboration with the film's visual effects team ensured that practical and digital elements of the costumes integrated seamlessly, particularly in the creation of Two-Face's burned visage. Hemming's costumes for the film's supporting cast created a cohesive visual world that extended the film's thematic concerns into every character's appearance. The film's sound design, supervised by Richard King, created an immersive audio environment that contributed as much to the film's psychological impact as its visual elements. King's work earned the film its Academy Award for Best Sound Editing, recognizing the complexity and precision of the sonic landscape he constructed. The designer's approach to the Joker's soundscape included the character's distinctive vocal processing, which used multiple layered takes to create an unsettling quality that suggested something not entirely human. King's work on the film's chase sequences required integrating the sounds of practical vehicles, explosions, and impacts into a coherent sonic experience that maintained spatial logic despite the complexity of the action. The designer's collaboration with Hans Zimmer on the film's score created moments where music and sound design became indistinguishable, particularly in sequences involving the Joker's ambient menace. King's work on the film's quieter moments was equally sophisticated, using subtle environmental sounds to create tension and atmosphere without relying on musical cues. The sound designer's contribution to the film's interrogation scene demonstrated his ability to use silence and negative space as effectively as active sonic elements. The film's marketing campaign, developed by Warner Brothers in collaboration with 42 Entertainment, represented a watershed moment in viral marketing, engaging audiences with the film's themes months before its release. The campaign began with a series of I Believe in Harvey Dent websites and materials that suggested a grassroots political movement, establishing Dent's public persona before audiences had seen the character on screen. The viral marketing expanded to include scavenger hunts, encrypted messages, and real-world events that brought the film's fictional world into contact with actual urban spaces. The campaign's handling of Ledger's death required a delicate balance between promoting the film and respecting the tragedy, ultimately emphasizing the quality of his performance rather than exploiting the circumstances of his passing. The marketing materials themselves, including the film's posters and trailers, established a visual language that emphasized the Joker's anarchic energy against Batman's disciplined minimalism. The campaign's success in building anticipation contributed significantly to the film's record-breaking opening weekend, demonstrating the power of innovative marketing strategies in the digital age. The viral campaign's legacy influenced subsequent blockbuster marketing for years, establishing interactive audience engagement as a standard practice for major releases. The film's critical reception, while overwhelmingly positive, included thoughtful dissents that have become part of the film's critical legacy, demonstrating that even the most celebrated works generate meaningful disagreement. Some critics argued that the film's philosophical pretensions exceeded its substance, suggesting that the moral dilemmas presented were ultimately window dressing on a conventional action narrative. Others found the film's runtime excessive and its pacing exhausting, arguing that Nolan's commitment to complexity sometimes sacrificed momentum for intellectual self-importance. Several reviews criticized Bale's Batman voice as a distraction that undermined the character's gravitas, suggesting that the vocal choice tipped into self-parody across the film's extended runtime. A minority of critics argued that the film's treatment of Rachel Dawes as primarily a motivation for male characters rather than a fully developed figure reflected a broader limitation in Nolan's approach to female characters. These dissenting voices, rather than diminishing the film's reputation, have contributed to a more nuanced critical conversation about its achievements and limitations. The film's treatment of its female characters, particularly Rachel Dawes, has been a consistent subject of critical discussion, with some arguing that the character exists primarily to motivate the male protagonists rather than as a fully realized figure. Maggie Gyllenhaal's performance brings depth and intelligence to the role within the limitations of its construction, making Rachel's death genuinely affecting despite the character's underdeveloped nature. The decision to kill Rachel rather than Dent, a choice that diverges from Batman comics canon, where Dent's fiancé typically survives, has been analyzed as a narrative choice that maximizes emotional impact while raising questions about the film's gender politics. Rachel's role as the emotional center of the love triangle between Bruce and Harvey positions her as a passive object of competition, with her agency limited primarily to the choice she makes between them. The letter she writes revealing that choice, burned by Alfred without Bruce's knowledge, becomes a plot device that exists to protect Bruce rather than to honor Rachel's expressed wishes. Gyllenhaal's casting, replacing Katie Holmes from Batman Begins, brought a different energy to the role, with critics noting that Gyllenhaal's performance suggested a more mature, grounded figure than Holmes's interpretation. The film's lack of other significant female characters, no Catwoman, no Barbara Gordon, no recurring female figures beyond Rachel, has been noted as a limitation in an otherwise ambitious ensemble. These critiques have become more prominent as contemporary discussions of representation in cinema have evolved, placing The Dark Knight within a broader conversation about how even celebrated films can fall short in their treatment of women. The film's engagement with the philosophy of terrorism and counterterrorism has been extensively analyzed by scholars, who note that the Joker's methods, decentralized cells, psychological warfare, attacks on civilian morale, closely mirror the tactics of modern terrorist organizations. The film's depiction of governmental response to terrorism, filtered through the prism of Batman's vigilante justice, raises questions about the limits of legitimate authority in confronting existential threats. Lucius Fox's moral objection to the mass surveillance system, and his insistence on its destruction after use, represents a clear articulation of civil libertarian principles within a narrative that otherwise embraces utilitarian compromises. The film's interrogation scene, in which Batman tortures the Joker for information, has been analyzed as a commentary on the efficacy of enhanced interrogation techniques in the post-9/11 context. The Joker's ability to withstand torture and even manipulate his captors during the interrogation suggests the limitations of such methods, a position that aligns with critical assessments of actual counterterrorism practices. The film's ultimate resolution, that preserving hope requires concealing uncomfortable truths, raises questions about democratic transparency that resonate with debates about state secrecy in the War on Terror. The ferry sequence's conclusion, in which ordinary citizens and prisoners both refuse to kill, offers a counter-narrative to the Joker's cynicism that scholars have read as a qualified endorsement of democratic public's capacity for moral choice. Nolan's refusal to resolve these tensions cleanly, leaving the film's politics ambiguous rather than didactic, has allowed The Dark Knight to remain relevant as political contexts have shifted. The film's relationship to the comic book source material demonstrates Nolan's selective approach to adaptation, drawing inspiration from canonical stories like The Killing Joke, The Long Halloween, and The Dark Knight Returns, while freely departing from established continuity. The Joker's philosophical framework, particularly his claim that one bad day can corrupt anyone, directly adapts Alan Moore's formulation in The Killing Joke, while dispensing with that story's exploration of the Joker's possible origin. Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face, accelerated from the comics where his corruption unfolds over years, serves the film's compressed narrative structure while maintaining the character's tragic essence. Batman's decision to take responsibility for Dent's crimes, preserving the White Knight's reputation while becoming a fugitive, draws from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns while reversing that story's political implications. The film's depiction of Gotham as a recognizable American city rather than a Gothic fantasyland reflects Nolan's commitment to grounding the material in a reality that audiences could recognize as their own. The decision to emphasize Batman's technological resources, including the surveillance system that many comics readers would recognize as a violation of the character's established ethics, represents Nolan's willingness to subordinate canon to thematic coherence. The film's reception among comics fans has been generally positive, with many regarding it as the definitive cinematic treatment of these characters despite its departures from source material. The film's influence on the superhero genre that followed was immediate and profound, establishing a template for gritty, realistic adaptations that many subsequent films attempted to emulate with varying degrees of success. The critical and commercial success of The Dark Knight convinced studios that superhero films could aspire to more than adolescent entertainment, opening the door for more ambitious projects across the genre. The film's failure to secure a Best Picture nomination at the Academy Awards led directly to the expansion of the category to up to 10 nominees, a change that reflected the industry's recognition that popular films could also be artistically significant. Subsequent superhero films, from Iron Man to Joker to The Batman, have all engaged with the template Nolan established, whether through emulation, critique, or conscious departure. The film's success also contributed to the marginalization of lighter, more traditionally comic book-inspired approaches within the genre, a development that has been both celebrated for its ambition and critiqued for its seriousness. The Nolan-esque approach, grounded settings, psychological depth, thematic complexity, became the standard against which superhero films were measured for much of the following decade. The film's legacy can be seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe's occasional attempts at darker, more politically engaged storytelling, even as that franchise largely maintained a different tonal register. The direct influence of The Dark Knight on Todd Phillips's Joker, 2019, is particularly evident, with that film explicitly positioning itself as a continuation of the tradition Nolan established. The film's philosophical engagement with the concept of the noble lie, the idea that societies may require falsehoods to maintain stability, has been analyzed as a central tension that the film never fully resolves. Batman's decision to conceal Dent's crimes, allowing Gotham to believe in a hero who never existed, represents a classical Platonic noble lie, a deception justified by its consequences. Gordon's acceptance of this deception, and his willingness to destroy Batman's reputation to preserve Dent's, suggests that even the film's most morally grounded character accepts that some truths are too dangerous to reveal. The film's final scenes, with Batman fleeing the police and Gordon delivering his famous speech about a watchful protector, frame this deception as heroic sacrifice rather than ethical violation. Critics who question the film's politics have noted that this resolution aligns with neoconservative arguments about the necessity of state secrecy and the public's incapacity for difficult truths. Others have defended the film's ambiguity, noting that Nolan presents the noble lie as tragic necessity rather than unambiguous triumph, with the emotional weight of the final sequence conveying the cost of deception. The question of whether the film endorses or merely dramatizes this resolution has remained central to critical debates about its political meaning. Alfred's burning of Rachel's letter, a smaller-scale noble lie designed to protect Bruce from pain, suggests that the film sees such deceptions as recurring features of human relationships rather than exceptional political measures. The film's use of the IMAX format represented a technical innovation that influenced blockbuster filmmaking beyond the superhero genre, demonstrating that large-format cinematography could be integrated into narrative filmmaking rather than reserved for documentaries and nature films. Nolan's insistence on using IMAX cameras, despite their size and noise issues that created significant technical challenges, reflected his commitment to image quality and audience immersion. The IMAX sequences in The Dark Knight, including the bank heist opening, the Hong Kong extraction, and the chase sequence, set a new standard for action cinematography that competitors struggled to match. The format's subsequent adoption by other directors, including Christopher McQuarrie for The Mission, Impossible franchise and Denis Villeneuve for Dune, can be traced directly to Nolan's demonstration of its capabilities. The financial success of The Dark Knight in IMAX theaters encouraged theater owners to invest in IMAX upgrades, expanding the format's footprint significantly in the years following the film's release. Nolan's continued advocacy for film-based IMAX photography, resisting the industry's shift toward digital, has made him the format's most prominent champion. The technical achievement of integrating IMAX footage seamlessly with 35mm photography, maintaining consistent color and texture across formats, represented a significant accomplishment for the film's post-production team. The film's Hong Kong sequence, in which Batman extracts Lau from a skyscraper without the Chinese government's permission, was filmed on location with Nolan's crew working under significant logistical constraints. The sequence required Nolan to shoot in Hong Kong without the permits that would have been required for a traditional production, employing guerrilla filmmaking techniques that gave the sequence its documentary-like authenticity. The narrative implications of Batman violating international sovereignty were largely overlooked in contemporary discussions, but have become more salient as the film has been re-examined through post-9/11 frameworks. The sequence's practical execution, with Bale and stunt performers actually suspended from the building rather than working against green screens, demonstrated Nolan's commitment to physical filmmaking. The Hong Kong shoot required coordinating with local authorities in ways that tested the limits of international film production, with Nolan's team ultimately succeeding through a combination of official cooperation and creative circumvention of restrictions. The sequence's success convinced Nolan that even the most technically demanding practical effects were preferable to digital alternatives, a principle that would define his subsequent filmmaking. The Hong Kong extraction also served as the film's most explicit demonstration of Batman's global reach, suggesting that his mission extended beyond Gotham's borders in ways that would be explored further in The Dark Knight Rises. The film's famous magic trick scene, in which the Joker makes a pencil disappear by slamming a man's head onto it, became one of the most discussed moments in the film despite lasting only seconds. Ledger's improvisation of the pencil trick, unscripted and discovered during filming, exemplified his ability to find character moments that were both terrifying and strangely humorous. The scene's placement early in the film served to establish the Joker's threat level immediately, communicating to audiences that this villain operated with a casual violence that made him fundamentally unpredictable. The response of the assembled mob bosses, silence, fear, and ultimately agreement to his terms, established the Joker's ability to dominate through sheer force of personality rather than physical power alone. The scene's dark comedy, a quality that Ledger brought to many of his scenes, prevented the Joker from becoming merely threatening, adding layers of unsettling charm to his menace. The pencil trick's status as an iconic moment was cemented by its absence from the film's marketing, preserving it as a genuine surprise for opening weekend audiences. The scene demonstrated Nolan's confidence in trusting his actors to find moments that served the character beyond the script's explicit requirements. The film's hospital explosion sequence, in which the Joker walks away from a detonating building while pressing a trigger that initially fails, included a moment of genuine improvisation when the explosives briefly malfunctioned. Ledger's decision to remain in character, fiddling with the detonator and looking around with exaggerated confusion, created a moment of comedy that became one of the film's most memorable beats. The practical explosion that follows, the result of actual pyrotechnics rather than visual effects, gave the sequence a physical weight that digital alternatives could not replicate. Nolan's decision to build and destroy a practical hospital set, rather than relying on models or CGI, reflected his commitment to capturing genuine reactions from his actors and his audience. The sequence's placement in the film's narrative, immediately following the Joker's successful corruption of Dent, reinforced the thematic connection between physical destruction and moral collapse. Ledger's performance in the scene, dancing out of the building as it explodes behind him, captured the Joker's complete investment in destruction as its own reward. The hospital sequence has been extensively analyzed for its post-9/11 imagery, with the destruction of a medical facility evoking specific associations with terrorism's targeting of civilian infrastructure. The film's ferry sequence, often cited as its moral climax, presents the Joker's final social experiment, Two vessels, one carrying civilians and the other prisoners, each given the detonator for the other's explosives. The sequence's construction, intercut between both boats' deliberations and Batman's pursuit of the Joker, creates sustained tension across the film's final act. The civilians' decision to vote for detonation, followed by their inability to act on that decision, suggests that the capacity for cruelty exists alongside the moral strength to resist it. The prisoner's decision, led by a convict who throws the detonator out the window, offers the film's most explicit counterargument to the Joker's cynical view of human nature. Nolan's decision to have a convicted criminal, the figure least invested in social order, demonstrate the strongest moral resistance has been analyzed as a deliberate subversion of expectations. The sequence's resolution, with both boats refusing to destroy the other, provides the film's only unambiguous moment of collective moral triumph. The Joker's response to this failure, frustration, genuine surprise, and the revelation that he would have detonated both boats anyway, suggests that his philosophical claims were always a rationalization for his own destructive impulses. The ferry sequence has been interpreted variously as an endorsement of democratic deliberation, an argument against utilitarian ethics, and a qualified affirmation of human decency in extreme circumstances. The film's final sequence, with Batman fleeing the police as Gordon delivers his voiceover about the Dark Knight, represents a deliberate inversion of traditional heroic closure, substituting victory with sacrifice. Batman's decision to take responsibility for Dent's crimes transforms the conventional superhero ending, public celebration, romantic resolution, into something more ambiguous and tragic. Gordon's speech, written after the fact to explain why the police must pursue the man who saved the city, frames Batman's sacrifice as the necessary condition for hope to survive. The sequence's visual language, with Batman pursued by helicopters while Gordon's voiceover describes him as a watchful protector, creates a paradoxical image of defeat that the film presents as a form of victory. The decision to end the film without revealing Batman's fate, leaving him in flight while the police close in, maintains the tension that has driven the narrative from its opening frames. The final shot of Batman on the Batpod, riding toward the horizon while Gordon's narration concludes, offers a resolution that is simultaneously conclusive and open-ended. The film's refusal to provide conventional closure has been interpreted as a commitment to the thematic complexity that distinguished it from its genre contemporaries. The final sequence's emotional power derives from its acknowledgement that heroism sometimes requires the hero to be unrecognized, uncelebrated, and actively pursued by those he protects. The film's title, The Dark Knight, has been analyzed as a deliberate contrast to Harvey Dent's White Knight designation, positioning Batman as the necessary complement to Dent's public heroism. The title's origins in the Batman mythos, drawn from the character's long history of being described as such, acquired new resonance within the film's thematic structure. The dark in the title operates on multiple levels: Batman's methods, his psychological state, and ultimately his public reputation, creating a phrase that encompasses the film's central concerns. The title's placement at the end of the film, when Gordon speaks it aloud for the first time, transforms it from description into earned designation. The choice to foreground the Dark Knight concept rather than Batman's traditional moniker signaled Nolan's intention to distinguish his interpretation from previous cinematic versions. The title's resonance has persisted in the film's cultural legacy, with Dark Knight now functioning as a shorthand for Nolan's entire trilogy. The film's place within Christopher Nolan's broader filmography reveals consistent thematic concerns: the ethics of surveillance, the nature of heroism, the relationship between deception and protection, that recur across his work. Nolan's tendency toward non-linear narrative structures, present in Memento and The Prestige, found expression in The Dark Knight through the complex interweaving of multiple plot threads rather than temporal disruption. The director's interest in the psychological costs of extraordinary responsibility, explored in the Batman trilogy, would continue in films like Inception and Interstellar. Nolan's working relationships with key collaborators, Hans Zimmer, Wally Pfister, Lee Smith, Nathan Crowley, were solidified during the trilogy, creating a creative team that would continue working together across subsequent projects. The director's commitment to practical filmmaking, tested during The Dark Knight's ambitious sequences, would become a defining characteristic of his approach to blockbuster filmmaking. Nolan's ability to balance commercial expectations with artistic ambition, demonstrated conclusively with The Dark Knight, established him as one of the few directors capable of operating at the highest levels of both scale and sophistication. The film's success also gave Nolan the leverage to pursue increasingly personal projects, including Inception and Dunkirk, while maintaining the resources necessary for large-scale production. The film's cultural impact extended beyond cinema, influencing television, literature, and even political discourse in ways that few blockbusters achieve. References to The Dark Knight appear across popular culture with unusual frequency, from political commentary invoking the Joker's chaos to artistic works engaging with the film's visual language. The film's treatment of urban crisis and institutional failure has been cited by urban planners and political theorists as a compelling dramatization of concepts central to their fields. Ledger's Joker has become a cultural archetype, referenced and invoked in contexts far removed from the film itself, demonstrating the character's penetration into collective consciousness. The film's marketing campaign, particularly its "Why So Serious?" tagline and associated imagery, achieved the rare status of becoming itself a cultural reference point. The film's posthumous selection for the National Film Registry confirmed what critics had long argued: that The Dark Knight had earned its place in American cultural heritage alongside films that had never been classified as genre entertainment. The film's endurance in critical discussions, appearing regularly on lists of the best films of the 2000s and of all time, suggests a longevity that many of its contemporaries have not achieved. The film's representation of urban space, with Chicago standing in for Gotham, created a vision of the city that resonated with contemporary anxieties about urban decay and renewal. Nolan's decision to shoot on location rather than on studio lots gave Gotham a specificity and authenticity that previous cinematic Gothams, often built on soundstages, could not match. The film's use of Chicago's architecture, its skyscrapers, its bridges, its elevated trains, created a visual identity for Gotham that felt distinct from New York while evoking similar associations of metropolitan complexity. The film's depiction of civic spaces, courthouses, police headquarters, city halls, emphasized the institutions that the Joker sought to undermine, making the city's physical structures represent its social order. The contrast between the city's public spaces and the private spaces where Batman operates, the penthouse, the Batcave, the warehouse, created a visual language of visibility and concealment that mirrored the film's thematic concerns. The film's representation of the city at night, photographed by Pfister with particular attention to light and shadow, established a visual tone that subsequent urban blockbusters have frequently imitated. The film's use of the Batpod, Batman's motorcycle that emerged from the wreckage of the Tumbler, represented one of the trilogy's most iconic vehicle designs and enabled the film's most visually distinctive chase sequence. The vehicle's design, which positioned the rider in a prone position between massive wheels, created a silhouette unlike any previous cinematic motorcycle, instantly recognizable and visually striking. The practical construction of functional Batpods, which were actually ridden by stunt performers rather than created through visual effects, allowed for the extended chase sequence's physical authenticity. The sequence's choreography, which included the Batpod driving up walls and through obstacles, was achieved through practical engineering rather than digital manipulation. The vehicle's integration into the film's narrative, emerging from the destroyed Tumbler as Batman's escape vehicle, created a moment of surprise that delighted audiences while demonstrating Nolan's commitment to practical effects. The Batpod's distinctive sound, designed by Richard King's sound team, contributed to its threatening presence, with the vehicle's auditory profile becoming as recognizable as its visual design. The vehicle's popularity with audiences led to its inclusion in The Dark Knight Rises, where it played an even more prominent role in the film's action sequences. The film's handling of its villain's death, the Joker's fate left ambiguous after his capture, with no resolution provided, departed from the conventions of superhero cinema in ways that audiences and critics have debated ever since. Nolan's decision not to kill the Joker, leaving the character in custody while the narrative moved to its final confrontation with Dent, reflected a commitment to thematic coherence over narrative closure. The Joker's final appearance in the film, suspended upside down and laughing at Batman, captures the character's essential quality. Even in defeat, he remains unbroken and unrepentant. The decision to leave the Joker alive, with no resolution to his story within the trilogy, Ledger's death precluding his return, created a narrative open-endedness that distinguished the film from more conventional blockbusters. Some critics have interpreted the Joker's survival as an acknowledgement that the threat he represents, chaos, nihilism, the rejection of order, cannot be definitively defeated, only contained. Others have argued that the narrative shift to Dent's corruption serves as the Joker's victory, making his physical fate irrelevant to the film's emotional and philosophical resolution. The ambiguity surrounding the Joker's fate has contributed to the character's legendary status, with audiences left to imagine what further chaos he might have wrought. The film's use of IMAX for key sequences created a variable aspect ratio that some audiences found distracting, but that Nolan defended as necessary to capture the full impact of his practical effects. The shifting between IMAX's 1.43 to 1 aspect ratio and standard 35mm's 2.35 to 1 created a viewing experience that reminded audiences of the format's presence, a choice that divided critics and viewers. Nolan's insistence on preserving the variable aspect ratio for home video releases, refusing to crop the IMAX footage to a consistent frame, reflected his commitment to presenting his vision as intended regardless of format conventions. The technical challenge of maintaining consistent color and contrast across two very different film formats required extensive post-production work, with the film's color timing team working to ensure seamless transitions. The IMAX footage's superior image quality created moments of extraordinary visual impact, particularly in the film's helicopter shots and wide cityscapes, that compensated for any disruption caused by the shifting aspect ratio. Subsequent Nolan films would expand the use of IMAX, with The Dark Knight Rises and Dunkirk including even more footage shot in the format, as the director's relationship with IMAX deepened. The film's technical achievements in this area were recognized by the Academy with its Best Sound Editing Award and nomination for Best Cinematography, though the film's overall exclusion from Best Picture remains one of the most discussed omissions in Oscar history. The film's opening bank heist sequence, often cited as one of cinema's greatest opening scenes, establishes every essential element of the Joker's character before he is even identified by name. The sequence's structure, a cascade of betrayals in which each criminal eliminates another until only the mastermind remains, demonstrates the Joker's ability to turn people against each other, the central tactic he will deploy throughout the film. The revelation that the final criminal's bus departure is timed to coincide with a school bus exiting from the bank's wall demonstrates the Joker's meticulous planning disguised as chaos. The sequence's visual style, with its emphasis on practical stunts and minimal CGI, established the film's commitment to authenticity that would define its action throughout. The Joker's final line to the bank manager, "I believe whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger," introduces the character's inversion of conventional wisdom, suggesting that trauma produces not strength but further deviation. The sequence's placement at the film's beginning, without any establishing context for the Joker's identity or motivation, plunges audiences directly into his world, forcing them to engage with his methods before they understand his philosophy. The bank heist's sophistication and planning, revealed in retrospect to be more complex than its chaotic surface suggested, establishes the Joker as a formidable antagonist whose apparent madness contains hidden method. Christopher Nolan's construction of the film's moral universe deliberately refuses the comfort of clear ethical binaries, presenting instead a spectrum of compromised positions where even the most heroic characters must make choices that stain their principles. The director's screenwriting approach with his brother Jonathan involved mapping each character's ethical trajectory across the film's 152-minute runtime, ensuring that every decision emerged from established psychological foundations rather than serving plot convenience. This meticulous character work allowed Nolan to present the Joker's philosophical challenge. That order is merely a fragile construct, not as abstract debate, but as lived experience tested through escalating pressure on each major figure. The film's structure, which dedicates its middle section to systematically dismantling everything Batman, Gordon, and Dent have built, transforms the conventional superhero narrative into something closer to classical tragedy, where the protagonist's victories are temporary and his defeats permanent. Nolan's decision to kill Rachel Dawes rather than Harvey Dent, reversing the expected outcome of the abduction scenario, demonstrated his willingness to sacrifice audience expectations for emotional authenticity, recognizing that genuine tragedy requires irreversible loss. The director's background in philosophy, studied at University College London, informed his approach to the film's central debates, grounding the Joker's anarchism in recognizable philosophical traditions while never reducing the character to mere intellectual abstraction. The screenplay's density required Nolan to trust his audience's capacity for sustained attention, refusing to simplify his narrative for perceived commercial necessity in a gamble that ultimately paid extraordinary dividends. The film's dialogue, frequently quoted and analyzed, achieves its resonance through a combination of aphoristic compression. The Joker's madness is like gravity, speech, and naturalistic exchange that grounds the film's more philosophical moments in recognizable human interaction. Nolan's direction of actors across the ensemble demonstrates his understanding that great performances emerge from creating environments where actors feel empowered to explore, as evidenced by Ledger's frequent improvisations and Bale's physical commitment to the role's demands. The director's use of IMAX technology extended beyond action sequences to intimate character moments, recognizing that the format's detail could serve dramatic tension as effectively as spectacular imagery. Nolan's refusal to shoot second unit, personally directing every frame of the film, ensured that the production maintained a unified vision across sequences that on many productions would be delegated to assistants. The director's insistence on practical locations and minimal green screen work forced the production to solve problems through craft rather than post-production, resulting in a film whose physical reality cannot be separated from its emotional impact. The Joker's philosophical architecture, carefully constructed through Ledger's performance and the Nolan's writing, presents a vision of human nature so bleak that its partial refutation in the ferry sequence carries exceptional weight. The character's consistent refusal to articulate a coherent origin story, each explanation he offers contradicts the previous, serves the philosophical purpose of suggesting that cause and effect explanations for human behavior are themselves illusions that order imposes on chaos. The Joker's obsession with proving that everyone shares his capacity for violence represents not merely sadism, but a genuine epistemological commitment, a belief that he has seen through the social contract to the truth beneath. His experiments throughout the film, the bank robbery where criminals kill each other, the murders that escalate pressure on Batman, the corruption of Harvey Dent, operate according to a consistent methodology: create pressure, remove safeguards, observe collapse. The character's fascination with Batman stems from recognition of a kindred spirit, another figure who has rejected society's norms, making their conflict not hero versus villain, but two competing visions of what lies beyond the social contract. Ledger's portrayal captures the Joker's genuine delight when his hypotheses prove correct, a scientist's satisfaction at experimental confirmation that makes his violence feel disturbingly intellectual. The Joker's indifference to wealth, demonstrated when he burns the mob's money, establishes him as a different category of antagonist than cinema typically offers, one motivated not by material gain, but by ideological commitment to destruction. The character's famous "Why so serious?" line functions as both taunt and philosophical challenge, questioning the gravity with which others treat the social arrangements the Joker considers meaningless. His relationship with Harvey Dent represents the film's central experiment, testing whether a man of demonstrated integrity can be pushed to abandon his principles, and the experiment's success becomes the Joker's greatest victory. The character's laughter throughout the film, from moments of triumph to moments of apparent defeat, suggests a consistency of worldview that external events cannot shake, making him perhaps the film's most philosophically coherent figure despite his moral bankruptcy. The Joker's capture during the chase sequence, revealed to be part of his plan, demonstrates that he understands the system he opposes well enough to manipulate its mechanisms for his purposes. Ledger's decision to make the Joker's physical movements languid and deliberate, even in moments requiring quick action, created a character who always appeared in control regardless of circumstances. Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face operates as the film's most devastating argument against the possibility of institutional reform, suggesting that the system's corruption is not incidental but structural. Eckhart's performance carefully calibrates Dent's pre-transformation charisma with enough edge that his eventual fall feels earned rather than arbitrary, the revelation of a darkness that existed alongside his idealism. The character's use of his coin before his disfigurement, flipping it to decide matters of prosecutorial strategy, establishes a psychological pattern that the Joker will later exploit, transforming a quirk into a vulnerability. Dent's aggressive interrogation of the Joker's henchman, in which he threatens to throw the man from a window, provides the film's first evidence that his commitment to justice includes a willingness to operate outside legal boundaries. The character's romance with Rachel Dawes serves to humanize him while also creating the vulnerability the Joker will exploit, making his corruption not merely professional but deeply personal. Dent's response to his disfigurement and Rachel's death, a complete rejection of the probability-based morality his coin once represented, demonstrates that the Joker's experiment succeeded because it exploited a pre-existing instability rather than creating one from nothing. The coin's scarring on one side represents visually what the film argues about Dent's nature, that the randomness he once trusted has revealed itself as fundamentally untrustworthy, leaving only vengeance. Two-face murders, each determined by the coin's flip, invert Dent's previous relationship to probability, transforming what was once a tool for impartial justice into a mechanism for abdicating moral responsibility. Eckhart's performance as Two-Face captures a figure who has abandoned all pretense of hope, operating with the cold efficiency of someone who has concluded that the universe offers no meaning beyond what force creates. The character's final confrontation with Gordon's family represents the complete inversion of everything Dent once stood for, transforming the protector of Gotham's families into their most direct threat. Dent's death at Batman's hands, necessary to save Gordon's son, forces the film's protagonist into the one act he has sworn never to commit, killing, though the circumstances transform this transgression into something morally ambiguous. The tragedy of Dent's arc lies not merely in his corruption, but in the film's suggestion that his idealism always contained the seeds of its destruction, that the intensity of his commitment to justice was inseparable from his capacity for vengeance. Jim Gordon's role as the film's moral anchor operates through his consistent position at the intersection of competing ethical systems, forced to navigate between institutional legitimacy and vigilante effectiveness. Oldman's performance conveys Gordon's exhaustion not merely with the fight against crime, but with the constant moral calculations his position requires, the endless weighing of means against ends. The character's partnership with Batman operates through a studied ambiguity, allowing Gordon to maintain plausible deniability while consistently acting to support the vigilante's efforts. Gordon's promotion to commissioner, earned through the film's events rather than granted at its outset, represents the system's grudging recognition that his methods, however unorthodox, have proven necessary. The character's family life, glimpsed in his interactions with his wife and children, provides the film's most direct representation of what Batman has sacrificed by choosing his mission. Gordon's relationship with Harvey Dent represents his hope that the system might reform itself from within, making Dent's corruption a personal betrayal that Oldman's performance registers without melodrama. The character's decision to participate in the cover-up of Dent's crimes, accepting Batman's proposal to take the blame, represents the film's final moral compromise, a choice Gordon makes not for himself, but for the city he serves. Oldman's performance in the film's final scene, delivering the voiceover that explains why Batman must be pursued, conveys the weight of a decision that will define Gordon's career and conscience indefinitely. The character's function throughout the trilogy as Batman's institutional counterpart provides the films with a necessary perspective on vigilantism, a voice that can articulate both its necessity and its danger. Gordon's survival through the trilogy's darkest moments, where so many around him fall, suggests that the film's worldview includes space for compromised but persistent decency. Alfred Pennyworth's function within the film's narrative extends beyond emotional support to philosophical commentary, with Michael Caine's performance providing the wisdom that Bruce's youth and trauma have prevented him from developing. The character's famous Bandit in Burma monologue serves as the film's most concise articulation of the Joker's nature, describing a motivation so alien that it cannot be understood, only confronted. Caine's delivery of this speech draws on his extensive classical training, delivering philosophical content with the weight of lived experience rather than academic abstraction. Alfred's relationship with Bruce has required him to become not merely a servant but a guardian, a role that sometimes demands deception in service of protection. His decision to burn Rachel's letter, revealing that she had chosen Harvey Dent over Bruce, represents an ethical choice that Caine's performance frames as mercy rather than manipulation. The character's wartime experience, referenced throughout the trilogy, provides the foundation for his understanding of the Joker, suggesting that Alfred has encountered evil in forms that Bruce's privileged upbringing has shielded him from. Caine's chemistry with Christian Bale across the trilogy creates one of cinema's most compelling surrogate father-son relationships, grounding the film's escalating stakes in recognizable human emotion. Alfred's presence in Wayne Manor provides the domestic sphere that Bruce has sacrificed, the home that remains available to him even as his mission prevents him from fully inhabiting it. The character's role as moral compass operates through restraint, with Kane's Alfred offering counsel that Bruce may ignore but cannot dismiss as uninformed. His final appearance in the trilogy's conclusion, watching Bruce's apparent death with grief that later transforms to recognition, demonstrates the character's function as witness to Bruce's journey. Lucius Fox's role as ethical conscience extends beyond the mass surveillance subplot to encompass broader questions about the relationship between technology, power, and accountability in the post-9/11 context. Freeman's performance conveys Lucius's fundamental decency without sentimentality, presenting a man whose ethical lines have been drawn through experience rather than naivety. The character's supervision of Wayne Enterprises' Applied Sciences Division positions him as the gatekeeper of Batman's technological capabilities, giving him leverage that he exercises reluctantly but firmly. The sonar surveillance system, which transforms every cell phone in Gotham into a listening device, represents the film's most explicit engagement with debates about security and liberty that define the Bush era. Lucius's threat to resign, when shown the system's capabilities, provides the film's clearest articulation of the position that some security measures cost more than they are worth. His insistence on destroying the system after its use, and Batman's agreement, suggests a limitation to utilitarian ethics that distinguishes Nolan's vision from more cynical approaches to security. Freeman's casting brings to the role an audience expectation of moral authority, an association with decency that the film leverages to emphasize the gravity of the choices being made. Lucius's function as Batman's technology provider also serves the practical purpose of explaining how a single individual could acquire the resources necessary for his mission, grounding the character in plausible material conditions. The character's limited screen time belies his narrative importance, with each appearance carrying weight because Freeman's performance conveys the stakes of the ethical choices being made. Lucius's survival through the trilogy's conflicts suggests that his approach, ethical engagement with problematic institutions rather than withdrawal, represents a viable path through the film's moral landscape. The film's representation of institutional failure operates across multiple levels, from the corruption of individual officials to the systemic dysfunction of entire organizations. The Gotham City Police Department's history of corruption, established in Batman Begins, continues to inform the present action, with officers who cannot be trusted and procedures that cannot be relied upon. The judicial system's vulnerability is demonstrated through the assassination of Judge Cirillo, a killing that suggests no legal figure is safe from the Joker's reach. The city's political leadership, represented by Mayor Anthony Garcia, appears well-meaning but largely ineffective, dependent on Gordon and Batman for actual security. The mob's organization, while sophisticated enough to have protected itself for decades, proves no match for the Joker's willingness to operate without the constraints that govern traditional criminal enterprise. The film's depiction of institutional response to crisis, police convoys that cannot protect their prisoners, hospitals that cannot secure their patients, ferries that cannot guarantee their passengers' safety, suggests that Gotham's formal structures have failed to adapt to the nature of the threat they face. The exception to this pattern is the response of ordinary citizens in the ferry sequence, suggesting that the film's hope rests not with institutions, but with individual moral capacity. The Joker's ability to infiltrate the police department, planting his henchmen as guards and officers, demonstrates the vulnerability of even reformed institutions to external manipulation. The film's resolution, the cover-up of Dent's crimes, represents an institutional failure of a different order, the decision that the truth cannot be trusted to the public whose institutions it would undermine. The film's exploration of surveillance and counterterrorism tactics has generated extensive scholarly analysis, positioning The Dark Knight as a significant text in post-9/11 cultural production. The sonar surveillance system, developed by Lucius Fox and deployed by Batman, mirrors the warrantless wiretapping programs revealed during the Bush administration's response to terrorist threats. Lucius's objection to the system, "I didn't sign up for this," articulates the position of intelligence professionals who found themselves asked to operate beyond legal and ethical boundaries they had previously accepted. The system's deployment requires Batman to violate the privacy of every citizen in Gotham, raising questions about whether the ends of catching the Joker justify the means of universal surveillance. The film's treatment of this question, Lucius's objection, Batman's acknowledgement of its validity, the system's destruction after use, suggests a qualified endorsement of surveillance as emergency measure combined with rejection of surveillance as permanent practice. The interrogation scene's depiction of torture, in which Batman's physical violence against the Joker produces no useful intelligence, offers a more skeptical view of enhanced interrogation techniques than the film's popular reception sometimes suggests. The Joker's ability to withstand and even manipulate his captors during the interrogation demonstrates the limitations of coercive methods against adversaries who have already abandoned conventional motivations. The film's representation of terrorism as decentralized, ideologically motivated, and resistant to traditional deterrence reflects the post-9/11 security paradigm that shaped its production context. The fairy sequence's conclusion, in which ordinary citizens choose not to kill despite the Joker's pressure, offers a counter-narrative to the assumption that terrorized populations will inevitably abandon their principles. The film's engagement with comic book source material operates through a process of selective adaptation that preserves essential character elements while transforming context and emphasis. The Joker's philosophical framework, particularly his claim that one bad day can corrupt anyone, directly adapts Alan Moore's formulation in The Killing Joke while dispensing with that story's exploration of the Joker's possible origin. Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face, accelerated from the comics where his corruption unfolds across years of storytelling, serves the film's compressed narrative structure while maintaining the character's tragic essence. Batman's decision to take responsibility for Dent's crimes, preserving the White Knight's reputation while becoming a fugitive, draws from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns while reversing that story's political implications. The film's depiction of Gotham as a recognizable American city, rather than a Gothic fantasyland, reflects Nolan's commitment to grounding the material in a reality audiences could recognize as their own. The decision to emphasize Batman's technological resources, including the surveillance system that many comics readers would recognize as a violation of the character's established ethics, represents Nolan's willingness to subordinate canon to thematic coherence. The Joker's appearance, the smeared makeup, the ill-fitting clothing, the scars, departs from the character's traditional aesthetic while preserving its essential function of signifying chaos and theatricality. The film's treatment of the Batman-Joker relationship as symbiosis, rather than simple opposition, reflects interpretations of the comics that had been developing since the character's creation. The decision to exclude the Joker's traditional origin as the Red Hood, leaving his past deliberately ambiguous, preserves the character's mystery while focusing attention on his philosophical function. The film's visual language of duality extends beyond character design to encompass cinematography, production design, and editing, creating a unified aesthetic expression of the film's central themes. Pfister's lighting consistently divides the frame between light and shadow, creating compositions where characters occupy both illuminated and darkened spaces simultaneously. The film's color palette establishes visual distinctions between characters: the Joker's discordant purples and greens, Batman's disciplined blacks, Dent's institutional grays, that reinforce their thematic positions. The production design creates spaces that reflect their inhabitants' psychology, from the Joker's improvised lairs to Batman's ordered technological environment to Dent's bifurcated apartment after his transformation. The film's editing often creates visual parallels between characters, cutting between Batman and the Joker in ways that emphasize their fundamental connection despite their opposition. The use of reflections and mirrors throughout the film, Dent's multiple reflections before his transformation, the mirrored interrogation room where Batman confronts the Joker, creates visual motifs of fractured identity. The IMAX format's ability to capture detail in both light and shadow allowed Pfister to create compositions where the boundaries between illumination and darkness become visually ambiguous. The film's title sequence, with its burning bat symbol, establishes the motif of destruction and transformation that will recur throughout the narrative. The design of Two-Face's burned visage, created through practical prosthetics rather than digital effects, grounds the character's duality in physical reality rather than metaphorical abstraction. The film's sound design achieves its impact through a combination of realistic environmental recording and constructed soundscapes that operate at the threshold of audience awareness. Richard King's approach to the Joker's soundscape included recording multiple takes of Ledger's dialogue and layering them to create an unsettling quality that suggested something not entirely human. The film's use of silence, particularly in the interrogation scene, creates tension that musical scoring could not achieve, demonstrating the sound design team's confidence in negative space. The Joker's theme, composed by Hans Zimmer as a single sustained electronic note that builds to unbearable tension, operates as sound design as much as music, blurring boundaries between score and environment. The film's action sequences required King to create sonic landscapes that maintained spatial coherence despite the complexity of the visuals, ensuring audiences could track the geography of each scene. The sound of the Batpod, created by combining motorcycle engines with jet turbine recordings, gave the vehicle a sonic presence as distinctive as its visual design. King's work on the ferry sequence required balancing multiple narrative threads through sound, ensuring audiences could follow both boats' deliberations while maintaining connection to Batman's pursuit of the Joker. The film's quieter moments, including Alfred's monologue about the bandit in Burma, demonstrate King's understanding that sound design serves performance, creating environments where dialogue registers with maximum impact. The film's Academy Award for Best Sound Editing recognized the exceptional achievement of a team that had made sound a central element of the film's narrative language. The film's editing structure, crafted by Lee Smith, creates a rhythmic architecture that sustains tension across the film's extended runtime while providing moments of necessary release. Smith's approach to the film's multiple intersecting narratives required careful calibration of pace, allowing each plot thread sufficient development while maintaining forward momentum across the film's complex structure. The editor's work on the chase sequence, cutting between Batman's pursuit of the Joker, the police response, and the threat to Harvey Dent, creates parallel tension that resolves in the sequence's spectacular conclusion. Smith's handling of the film's emotional moments, particularly Rachel's death and Dent's transformation, demonstrates restraint that allows performances to register without editorial interference. The editor's collaboration with Nolan across multiple films had developed a shorthand that allowed Smith to understand precisely how the director's complex narrative structures needed to be assembled. The film's final act required Smith to intercut between the ferry sequence, Batman's pursuit of the Joker, and Dent's murder spree, creating a three-part structure that maintained coherence across simultaneous narrative threads. Smith's decision to allow the film's most hopeful moment, the ferry passenger's refusal to kill, to breathe without cutting away, demonstrates his understanding that the film's emotional arc required moments of sustained focus. The editor's work on the film's opening bank heist establishes the rhythmic approach that will characterize the entire film, alternating tension with release, action with character development. Smith's editing contributed significantly to the film's critical reputation for pacing, with reviewers consistently noting that the film's extended runtime never feels excessive. The film's production design created a Gotham City that expanded on the aesthetic established in Batman Begins while introducing new visual elements that reflected the escalating conflict. Nathan Crowley's work on the film's practical sets included the construction of the Batcave as a practical space rather than a digital environment, giving Batman's operations a tangible physical presence. The production designer's collaboration with Nolan on the film's IMAX sequences required constructing sets that could accommodate the camera's size and weight, influencing everything from set dimensions to construction materials. Crowley's work on the film's practical effects included the construction of the 18-wheel truck that flips during the chase sequence, a moment achieved through physical engineering rather than digital effects. The production design's approach to Gotham's architecture emphasized the city's verticality, with skyscrapers and bridges creating a visual language of height that reinforced the film's themes of aspiration and fall. Crowley's recreation of Chicago as Gotham involved transforming recognizable locations through lighting, signage, and practical set dressing that suggested a city simultaneously familiar and alien. The production design of the Joker's spaces, the abandoned industrial buildings, the hospital, the ferries, emphasized improvisation and decay, reflecting the character's relationship to the material world. The design of Harvey Dent's apartment before his transformation, clean and modern, gives way after his disfigurement to a space that reflects his fractured psychology, with the apartment's destruction mirroring Dent's own. Crowley's work across the trilogy created a Gotham that evolved with its narratives, the city's physical condition reflecting the state of its soul. The film's costume design extended beyond the central characters to create a visual world where every element of clothing contributed to the film's thematic language. Lindy Hemming's approach to the Joker's costume emphasized the character's improvised, unsettling quality. The too short vest, the mismatched patterns, the cheap purple coat that suggested a clown who had assembled his identity from whatever materials were available. Hemming's work on Batman's suit refined the costume from Batman Begins, allowing greater mobility while maintaining the protective, armored quality that distinguished Nolan's realistic approach. Two-Face's costume after Dent's transformation deliberately emphasized the character's fragmentation, with half the suit burned and the other half maintained, visually representing his psychological division. Hemming's design for Harvey Dent's pre-transformation appearance used color and cut to suggest a politician of genuine substance rather than mere style, with suits that conveyed authority without ostentation. The costume designer's work on the film's supporting cast created a cohesive visual world that extended the film's thematic concerns into every character's appearance. Hemming's collaboration with the film's visual effects team ensured that practical and digital elements of the costumes integrated seamlessly, particularly in the creation of Two-Face's burned visage. The film's police uniforms, designed to suggest the department's transition from corruption to reform, reflect the institutional changes that Gordon's leadership has effected. Hemming's work on the ferry sequence, with its civilian and prisoner populations, required costuming that distinguished groups without caricature, treating each passenger as an individual within a unified visual scheme. The film's marketing campaign represented a watershed moment in viral marketing, engaging audiences with the film's themes months before its release through innovative interactive strategies. The campaign's "I Believe in Harvey Dent" materials created a fictional political movement that audiences could join, building investment in Dent's character before the film's release. The viral campaign's scavenger hunts and encrypted messages required participants to engage with the film's themes of detection and investigation, mirroring the activities of its characters. The campaign's handling of Ledger's death required a delicate balance between promoting the film and respecting the tragedy, ultimately emphasizing the quality of his performance rather than exploiting the circumstances. The marketing material's visual language, particularly the Joker's "Why So Serious?" tagline and associated imagery, achieved the rare status of becoming itself a cultural reference point. The campaign's success in building anticipation contributed significantly to the film's record-breaking opening weekend, demonstrating the power of innovative marketing strategies in the digital age. The viral campaign's legacy influenced subsequent blockbuster marketing for years, establishing interactive audience engagement as a standard practice for major releases. The campaign's use of real-world locations, including the distribution of Joker cards in major cities, blurred boundaries between the film's fiction and audience reality. The marketing team's decision to withhold the Joker's full appearance until late in the campaign built anticipation, while allowing the character's reveal to function as a major event. The film's relationship to its predecessor, Batman Begins, involves both continuity and transformation, with Nolan building on established foundations while shifting the trilogy's thematic focus. The earlier film's concern with Batman's origins and his relationship to the League of Shadows gives way in The Dark Knight to a broader exploration of institutional reform and its limits. The trilogy's visual language evolved between films, with The Dark Knight adopting a more varied color palette and more dynamic camera movement than its predecessor's more restrained approach. The character of Rachel Dawes, played by Katie Holmes in Batman Begins and Maggie Gyllenhaal in the sequel, changes between films in ways that reflect Nolan's evolving approach to the character's function. The relationship between Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent, absent from Batman Begins, becomes central to The Dark Knight, representing Bruce's hope that legitimate authority might accomplish what vigilantism cannot. The film's treatment of Gotham evolves from a city in the process of being saved to a city whose salvation is perpetually deferred, reflecting the trilogy's increasingly complex moral vision. The character of Jim Gordon, already established as an ally in Batman Begins, assumes greater prominence in The Dark Knight, reflecting the trilogy's interest in institutional reform as complement to vigilante action. The film's musical scores, both composed by Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, maintain thematic continuity while developing new material appropriate to the sequel's expanded scope. Nolan's direction across both films demonstrates consistent attention to character psychology, while allowing the sequel's larger canvas to accommodate more complex narrative structures.